SOMA is the latest first-person horror-themed walking simulator developed by Frictional Games, the very same guys who helped pioneer the genre with titles like Penumbra and Amnesia: The Dark Descent. People looking at SOMA for a spiritual successor to those games, however, are going to be sorely disappointed. SOMA is their latest effort, and it's a weird game. It's a horror game that at times doesn't have any horror, with largely watered down gameplay mechanics that don't really offer up anything all that innovative. Now, I should also warn you that I will talk about a minor spoiler in this review, but most people will probably figure out this spoiler early on in the game anyway, but I feel I should mention this before we get started. So, things start off interestingly enough. You're a guy named Simon going in for a brain scan at a suspiciously abandoned research facility. During this routine scan, something appears to go wrong, and you wake up 100 years later inside an underwater station overrun with robots. Joining up with a robot called Catherine, you soon figure out your mind has been scanned into a robotic body after Simon passed away all those years ago. Now the two of you then make a journey across the station to an area called Site Tower with the hopes that a futuristic space gun can launch your consciousness into a virtual reality system called the Ark, basically the Matrix in space. It's an interesting story, and there's more than a few moments that are utterly depressing where you come across other survivors who are in a real bad state or have to make binary decisions, both of which aren't ideal. Simon and Catherine are both likeable to an extent, even if their dialogue is contrived at times and a little bit long-winded. There's something just so great about their companionship and the way they grow on each other as the game progresses.
That's great. Let's go get it.
Much like the way you see the environment deteriorating as you get closer to your objective. This really is a well-crafted and believable world. It takes a lot of cues from other games like BioShock and System Shock. Now, whereas in BioShock you felt like the ocean was taking the city back, in SOMA you get this sense of machinery taking over everything, as large robotic appendages jut out of walls and block hallways and corridors. I had no issues with getting the game running smoothly, and aside from some minor pauses when the game auto-saved or loaded a new area, it seemed to run pretty smooth and also looks great to boot. The art style seems to take influences from artists like H.R. Geiger, and yeah, it's a fascinating game world at times. It's immersive, it's atmospheric, and it can at times be downright frightening, without relying on jump scares. And then yet at other times, it's almost the polar opposite. SOMA is, as I said, the watered down version, no pun intended, of what the developers achieved in Penumbra and Amnesia. It is at times a walking simulator. I mean, the game is essentially one long corridor. Yeah, there's sections when you're on the ocean floor heading ambiguously in a certain direction as you're moving from site to site, but the interior areas are very straightforward in their progression, with little to no backtracking and puzzles that are usually blatantly obvious. There's about 5 different monster types in the game, all of which you simply have to avoid, in between long sections of puzzle solving and exposition-heavy dialogue between Simon and Catherine. We've seen this kind of thing in dozens of first-person horror games lately, you know what I mean? Like the enemy just patrols around an enclosed area, and you either have to collect something in that area or just get through it unseen. Avoiding the monsters can initially be tense as you figure out the behaviour of each of these enemy types, but that quickly evaporates because when you are detected, you can simply just haul ass for a few seconds and they'll just stop chasing you. There's an abundance of props scattered all over the place, but flinging them to distract monsters away from your location seems to have no effect, and they'll often just waddle around your general vicinity. It seems they'll only detect you if you stare at them for too long, much like how it worked in Amnesia, and the concept again works quite well, but it can remove a bit of the horror element as you don't ever get to appreciate the work and effort that went into making them visually repellent. Even still, the game is very liberal in what you can get away with. One enemy type in particular I was able to literally stare at for 3 or 4 seconds before he even detected me and went into an alert status. And then even if you are detected and worst case scenario attacked, they just knock you to the ground and then they run off. After a few seconds you get back to your feet with a gimped movement speed, but you can carry on all the same. All throughout the game there's this sense of it kind of holding your hand constantly. Rarely in this game do you have to worry about carrying items and using them in the future. About the only thing you ever need to do is plug some memory cards into computer terminals. But these memory cards are literally in the same room as a computer terminal. Item management is the cornerstone of any good horror game, and it's completely absent here, and it's just disappointing. I'll be honest though, there were a few puzzles I got stuck on, but I think that was more because the game did a poor job of explaining what I was supposed to be doing, more so than me not figuring out the solution. Early on in the game you get something called an Omni Tool, which is an electronic device used to open doors and access computer terminals, and we're told this thing needs to be upgraded to reach new areas, but the game literally spoon feeds you these upgrades and all but hands them to you on a silver platter. SOMA also feels like it has an agenda, like it's got a message it's trying to get out there, but I'm just not sure what that message is. Catherine and Simon often have these heated debates about, right and wrong, humanity, philosophy, and religion, but it doesn't ever really seem to add up to anything. Don't get me wrong, Sonny Jim, this game has its moments. Like I said, there's times when you're forced to make one of two shitty decisions, and you really do feel like crap after doing it. There's some very well designed sections against certain monster types, and later in the game you're on the deep ocean floor, avoiding anglerfish as you can barely see 3 feet ahead of you, surrounded by creepy looking sea creatures. Now that's the kind of thing I don't think I've ever seen in a video game before, and it's pretty awesome. But it's just a shame that in so many ways this is such a half-baked horror game that doesn't seem to take any risks. Those brief moments where I came close to filling my trousers were over just as quickly as they begun. It took me about 7 hours to get through, and that included me being stuck on a few areas and reading everything I came across, but at most I don't think this could take longer than 10 hours tops, but for the price they're asking, that's still a pretty good deal. At the end of the day though, SOMA is a playable game. It tugs on the heartstrings a fair bit, it's at times experimental and artistic, and it pulls most of it off. But people looking for a hardcore horror game set underwater, avoiding murderous robots, solving intense puzzles and scraping by for resources, might want to look elsewhere.